There we
Okay.
go.
This is Kendra Karen. I'm here with Mom and Dad Packard at Packard Oaks in Telephone, Texas. Today is February 19th, 2020, and we're going to first talk to Dad about his father.
Oh, okay. Well, my father's name is Forrest Leroy Packard, and he was born in
Burlington.
Burlington, Wyoming, in a wagon they had just pulled in. My grandma and grandpa moved from Utah, Vernal, Utah area, and they they heard that there was good land up there in the Bighorn Basin of Wyoming. That's northern Wyoming, just east of Yellowstone Park, and east 30 miles east of Cody is where it was. And there's a part of the river there. The name of the river was
Bend in the river. Mormon.
Mormon Bend, but what's the name of that river? Anyway.
Oh, Grable.
Grable River. Grable River ran through there, and at that time there was no town, and he was still. They had the wagon. I don't think it was a covered wagon either, because they didn't have that kind of money, and so it was just like a old wheat wagon that they put their beds and stuff in, and Grandma was expecting at the time that they moved, and the baby was born. He was the first child born in the Bighorn Basin area, and
What number
other than
in
Indians,
family was he?
He was about the seventh
Of
child.
How many?
And they ended up having about 9 or 10. Anyway, it wasn't too long after that they moved north and created a little town there called Burlington. And Grandpa actually was the first branch president and later the first bishop of the church there in Burlington. And they were all moving into that area of the river called the Mormon Bend of the river, because they kind of had a little community down there, but they elected not to settle there. The town was like 2 or 3 miles north of the river. And we have a picture of the.
It's over there, honey, in the corner if you want to go get it.
Okay.
Anyway, it's.
She'll get it.
Where did you get this picture?
What we did is there was a painting, in the museum in Cody, Wyoming. There's a big museum there, and they did somebody did a painting. I can't remember who did it, but and I came over close to it with the camera, took a picture of it.
Mom.
Mom did.
I did. Here, honey.
But they show covered wagons, and that's not really the way it was. They couldn't afford those kind of wagons. But the river, you can see the bend in the river back there where they settled.
Get it up closer too. It's reflecting off of the window over there.
Yeah. Anyway, that's where he was born, in a wagon. And he lived there until he was, I think he was about, he was born in 1793, and they moved to Canada in 1910. That's 10 and 7. He was 17 years old, and the oldest one with the family. By that time, the others had all gone and married and stuff. And so he was in charge of the team of horses and herding the cows and getting them there with the family when they moved to Canada. And they had a kind of a falling out, we found, when we were up there. Bernie and his wife and I and Talmadge went there just less than a year ago. We went all the way through that area, and we found out that they had a falling out with the second counselor in the district presidency, the state presidency, and so they released Grandpa as the bishop, and also at that same time their oldest daughter was expecting a baby, and they moved her into Idaho to live with her sister, and had the baby there. And they lost the contract also. They finished the ditches, the Packard canals, and but they also had the contract of laying down the roadbed of the railroad that was coming through, to do the roadbed, and they lost that contract, and so they decided that they already had Talmadge's brother had already moved. I mean, Grandma's brother had already moved to Canada and thought that it was really great up there, and they had talked him into coming up. So they did. They moved to Canada, and it's interesting when Bernie and I finished there as we were driving to the reunion. After finishing seeing all this and learning the reasons that they went, if they hadn't have moved to Canada, Dad would have never met Mom, because that's where Mom was. Mm-hmm. You would never had the Packard family. And right now we're talking 2,000, 3,000 descendants of Mom and Dad. Are all very, very influential in the church. And so it has been a fantastic marriage with Forrest and Esther Packard. And Dad was very debonair. He was good looking, very musical. He sang a lot. He was in quartet.
Come from a musical family? How did that start? You don't know? I
don't know for sure, but I know the Carters sing and the Packards sing.
So you got it from both lines.
Wow. And so, anyway, he Dad was over there in not Lethbridge, but
Glenwood.
Yeah, he was in the Glenwood area, and he worked for the stake president, whose name was President Wood. And they named that town after his son, Glenn Wood. So the town is Glenwood. And he worked for him on his great big cattle ranch. And then he needed to get some schooling, and so he went to the academy, which is like a high school. He didn't have a lot of grades of school, but he did go to that academy oh boy, my mind is going.
Okay, hurry.
It's lucky you're getting this while I'm still young.
I was going to say, and that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, because I start to lose the remembrance. But the name of the town where the academy is. And anyway, he went over there and
Lethbridge, honey. Wasn't it Lethbridge? Alberta, Canada.
It's in Alberta.
Raymond.
Yeah,
Raymond. The Raymond Academy.
Canada is the academy, Well, anyway, they had this dance. And Mom's brother was at the academy, and she talked his sister Esther to come to the dance. Dad fell for her bad, just kind of like I fell for her.
Oh, honey.
At a dance.
At a dance.
Okay, go on.
So Dad,
anyway,
what did your dad look like? Tell me about his physical appearance.
He was shorter than me. I'd say about 5'6", 5'5", maybe 5'6". Dark eyes. No, he had blue eyes.
Blue eyes.
And light complected more. That's why a lot of the children, half of the children were blonde a little bit, and the other half were darker colored because Mom was brown-eyed. Anyway,
he looks like Ron.
He looks
looks like Big Ron.
My brother Ronald.
Looks like looks like
Did
Forrest.
he have curly hair?
Not really.
No curly hair?
A little bit curly to it. Yeah, he did. He was they were wavy, and I know his eyebrows. I remember were
Bushy.
bushy.
John Lewis look.
No unibrow or
No.
Anyway, they dated there and went to the dances and things, and they got married there, and then they got sealed in Salt Lake. They went down to conference, and then they were resealed in the Karsten Temple as soon as it opened. So I think they were one of the first couples there.
What did they
Anyway,
do?
how old was he when he married? And he didn't go on a mission.
he did not go on a mission
Okay.
until after he was married. But he, I would say that he was married in 15.
1915.
Uh-huh.
So they went through the Great Depression together.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, as a husband and wife, yes. 1915, right in there is when they got married, because Dee was born in 1916, and Beth was born in 1918, and Clay was born in 1919. Anyway, he came down during the First World War to avoid the draft. He and his younger brother, Uncle Earl, my Uncle Earl Packard, talked it over and decided that they needed to do something to divert them from the draft, and they realized that it was working for the government in the war effort. And they went to Bremerton, Washington, and helped with the ammunition and shipbuilding there in Bremerton. It's right straight across the bay from Seattle, Washington, and they lived there for a while. Dad was married, and Uncle Earl was not married. He was single. Anyway, they had 2 children up there, Dee and Beth, and then they moved to Nampa, Idaho, and that's where Dad went on a mission to California. Quite successful on his mission. Very good looking and great companions, and did really well in opening up that whole area in California, because the missions in those days were big, and they had to go long distances.
What was he like spiritually?
He was very, very humble, but very a dynamic speaker, and very convincing, very strong testimony.
Do you know the scriptures like your mom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he knew the scriptures much time before Mom did, and he never served as a bishop or stake president or anything like that, but he was more of the quiet but firm type, and
Haven't you told me in the past that he was the one that was the loving?
Yeah, she was.
Hug and express his feelings towards you, and
yeah, he was.
He was the soft one of the 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he worked in Nampa. He even worked for. I found out that he worked in the undertaker mortuary, and he even marched a couple of times with the Ku Klux Klan, dressed out, and then quit because he didn't agree with their principles.
Oh, honey, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's a new story. I've never heard that one.
Well, it's in Dee's history. He remembers it.
What do you remember of him before he left? You were 5.
Well, let
Do you
me
have any-
let me
oh,
get
sorry, go
to
ahead.
Nampa a little bit. You know, he got this house in Nampa. This is the first house that they purchased a house, but he wanted to get a basement, and so what he did is he got a team of horses and what they call a Fresno, which is a scraper, and he started going down, and then he did one corner of the house, and then he put a pillar there, a post, big one, to hold the corner of the house up, and went further and further in, and then did the other corners, and he
Wow.
ended up putting in a full basement with the house sitting there. And I thought that was very interesting. Then it was about that time that Mom and Dee went out looking for property. They wanted to get out of town because Dee and Jay were having moral problems with smoking and stuff. Well, Dee was just trying it, but Jay was getting bad.
How old were they? Were they teenagers doing that?
Younger. And so that's when they found the farm in Meridian. And so they moved out onto the 40-acre farm, and at that time Dad traveled back and forth from Napa and held out his regular job. And he became really a good carpenter, finished carpenter. When he came home from the prison camp, he was so qualified that he could actually make pews, benches from lumber.
Woodworking, like he was good. Carving.
He glue the big boards together and smooth and polish them. And if you ever go to the temple in Nauvoo, look at the banister there, and you'll see that's how they make that. It's all from scratch. That's what it is. Anyway, they moved to Meridian, and that's where all of us kids went to school. And when the Second World War broke out, 8 months before, they were building out there on Wake Island and paying really, really well money for carpenters and contract construction workers. And so he signed up and he almost had Dee sign up, but Dee was newly married and didn't want to do it. And so, but he went out on Wake Island. He was designated as the group leader. On the way out, he stopped at Honolulu, and there in the temple, he received a very, very special blessing. And we have tapes on that blessing that we interviewed the wife of the temple president who gave the blessing. The outgoing temple president was there, and the incoming temple president was there, and the two of them is the one that blessed him down in the basement of the temple there in Laie Temple. And
That's President and Sister Belliston.
yeah, Belliston.
Belliston was the temple president that was doing this.
Sister Belliston says that when I was standing to the side and watching, a light came out of the window and went right on your dad's head. This is quoting her. We have her on tape.
Wow.
And she says, and after it was all over with, she noticed there was no window. That's what she said. And so he was promised in that blessing that he would come home and his family would be intact and he wouldn't lose any of his kids and everything. And so all during the war, while he was a prisoner, he knew that he would be coming home, and he tried very hard to convince the others and was successful with some that he was close to who were members of the church, because the Japanese were so firm that they would shoot and kill you if you tried to escape. And he says, don't do it. He says, we're coming home. This war is going to be over and we're going to win. This was at the very beginning. When they hit Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor, they went right on, and that's where they stopped. Because it was on the other side of the international date line, it technically it's the next day, the 3rd. I think that Pearl Harbor was hit the 2nd of December of 41, and it was the next day that they hit Wake Island, and Wake Island fought back, and the Japanese kept trying to take it because they had a base there that they were building, a submarine base is what it was, and an airfield, and that's quite close to Japan. It's like Midway. The Japanese did everything they could to capture Midway. Well, anyway, Guam fell in 3 days, and Japan Wake Island lasted 16 days, and it fell on Christmas Day. And during that time, there's a whole book there that Ellen D. granddaughter wrote. It is just excellent, an excellent book on the whole story of Wake Island and my dad. And anyway, he hid in a dugout and lasted another 2 days by scounging out with 6 other guys. I think it was 6 or 5. And it was interesting when he was sent out to get some food. A Japanese soldier hit him on the head, and Dad looked up and smiled at him, and that Japanese soldier became a friend of his and allowed him to take his that metal hat that you saw, and we still have it. The Walkers have it, and his garments, his temple garments. He was able to take them.
Did he ask him if he?
I guess so, but
yeah.
Anyway, he couldn't speak Japanese, and anyway, they took him on a ship, and I think it was 2 weeks on the water before they arrived, and they ended up finally into Shanghai, China. You know, it was interesting when the war was coming down to the end, where they were losing. They moved them up through Korea, from Shanghai up through Korea and down to the bottom of Korea, and they put them on board just a ship that was hollow underneath, and they put all the prisoners down there, 1,100. And they were taking them to Japan to spread them out in those prison camps. And they were much firmer in Japan, the guards were. But in China, they had some Chinese that were helping an awful lot, and they were a lot more lenient. And so we think that there was less than 20 out of about 1,500, counting the military, who were prisoners, and only about 20 of them died during that whole 4 years. And it was from beriberi and things like that. One of them got killed when he was playing ball, ran up against the electric fence. Anyway, it's interesting, the ship that was going across the Japan Sea to taking with Dad in it, the captain of that ship, because American submarines had sunk many ships with our prisoners in it. It was terrible. But that captain was able to maneuver the ship. He could see the torpedoes coming and would maneuver the ship to avoid them, and then maneuver it again until he could get to land. That captain and the submarine that was shooting the torpedoes, long after the war, met and discussed that whole thing, put the whole story together of what was going on. And he had no idea, the American submarine had no idea it was clear full. 1,100 Americans were in that ship that he would have sunk. Anyway, going back to the blessing in Hawaii, Dad
That's
knew he was
promise.
going to come home.
Yeah.
Just that one episode was very significant.
What made him decide to get a blessing before? Did he?
Is
that common back then?
Yeah,
get
and to leave that
blessings?
many kids at home. I mean, we had 12, 13 children. Well, all of them but Barbara, so that's 16.
But they did priesthood blessings. That was common back then. Like
Yeah.
church, they would do that.
And Dad really believed in it because he had been on a mission. And he went to a California mission when there was 4 children at home. Most of you don't know that 2 of my companions were married men.
Wow.
And so they still called them late. But Dr. Smith, that was my companion, he had to be interviewed by 2, I think it was 2 or 3 apostles. He had to be interviewed by 2 or 3 apostles to get permission to go. And then they only allowed him to go 4 months. And I had him 3 out of those 4 months was my companion. And we did very well. In Bluefield, West Virginia, we doubled that branch. It was very successful. Anyway, back to Dad. He on Wake Island, he was selected by the commander of the whole island to be the speaker and the minister that took care of the dead on that those attacks, group burials, and so he was having Sunday school classes every week.
Didn't they call him the little minister?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
They
Little
called him the
preacher.
little minister.
Little preacher, honey.
Little
Yeah.
preacher? I can't remember.
Anyway, he was able to help quite a few of the boys get rid of their tobacco and stuff. That they were only 17, 18, 19-year-old kids. And they came over there, and so he was able to. In fact, one of them became stake president in Las Vegas when he came home, but he was just a kid. And he this is almost quoting him. He says, "Your dad is number 2 next to the Savior."
Because he did save him.
Because he has done more for me.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we have his book here. He's
Bill Taylor.
Yeah, Bill Taylor. Yeah. Anyway, lucky I have married my wife. She helps me remember.
That's right.
But anyway, he had quite a few experiences there, and I was very, very fortunate when we were on our mission in Japan that I was able to, when our mission was coming to an end, got permission to go down to the Japanese mission. Todd and I were already found the one in Shanghai, China, on a tour that we made, and I wanted to see the one in Niigata that L&D found that's where Dad was at Niigata, Japan, and I flew down there and spent a day with. It was interesting. The guy that showed me around was a counselor in the stake presidency there. He was a second counselor, first counselor, and he was in charge of all of the libraries and all of the everything like that of his prefecture or his state, and his first words when I was on the phone with him, there was never a prison camp in Niigata. I says, "Oh, there was." It's interesting. He had to convince everybody, all of his employees. He says, "Oh, there is. There's a prison camp here." In fact, Brother Packard is on his way here, and he wants to see it because his dad was here. And they have documentation and pictures. And what happened is at the time the camp was there, it was outside of the city limits. And by the time I got there, it was way inside the city limits because Niagara is a big city. Did you know that Niagara was the third spot for the atomic bomb? Niagara, Japan.
He is just dodging.
Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Niagara. And it was very close between those last two of which one that they were going to drop the atomic bomb on. It came very close, and I think it was decided by weather. But they all are great, massive cities and seaports. Anyway, Dad came home and was let go, and Mom met him in San Francisco. Did she drive? No, she took the train because he came home by a train.
You're sure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember meeting him there in Boise, and little Barbara remembers it because Dad had whiskers. He didn't shave that morning, and
He brought her a package of fruit,
juicy fruit.
juicy fruit gum.
She remembers that. That's
Yeah,
She had never had anything like that.
and he brought it home for her.
Anyway,
What was he like after the war? Did he talk about any of it?
he was a broken man physically, very, very broken man. He
Physically, he was.
yeah, physically he was, but not mentally. He still had all of his which he, and they took all of his teeth out and put hearing aids on him, so you had to speak very loud for him. And they had him as a carpenter like that. He and 3 or 4, well, it was more like 5 other members of the church who agreed to help build chapels in the Boise Valley. And so you go out to Kuna and Nissa and Meridian and Nampa and Caldwell, and there's still some of those chapels that they built. And he was the finished carpenter among them, could really do the cabinetry and the benches and the chairs and the pews. They weren't cushioned, but they were smooth and contoured.
I think it's interesting that his brothers kind of inherited that ability. Like Jay was a carpenter, Bill was a carpenter.
Yeah.
In fact, Ron has been a carpenter, and little Ron in California
Jay's
is
son.
a carpenter. And so a lot of them.
He's an attorney, but he does everything. He has all the
builds special
tools
things.
downstairs. That's
It's just a hobby.
It's a very big hobby with little Ron, and but carpentry has really taken hold in the Packard family. Anyway, he came home, and Mom and Dad had a problem of
Him coming
taking
back
charge.
and being the patriarch, and she had been.
And she
Yeah.
kept working and making the money, and because she had the dress shop and was making a lot of money, and and so anyway, that's the reason that they talked it over, and Dad decided to go on a mission again, and he went to Kentucky, and was in some of the same type of people in same areas that I was on, and
Bernie and Nancy, honey, Sarah.
So she
you mean Nancy.
continued to lead family prayer, family meetings, scriptures, even when he came home. Like, did she have a hard time letting him?
yeah, she would do that. She would let him to take
Yeah.
charge, but decision making was mainly up to her because she kind of
Ruled the roost.
run the
Was that
family.
always the way it was, where he was the submissive one and she was?
Mhm. That's
more
what
dominant?
that's what I remember. But you talk to Dee and Jay and them before the war, he wasn't that way. That Mom
Why?
was more of a normal wife. But anyway, he they were going to Boise to close out these accounts and get straight with the IRS and stuff with Mom. And Mom wanted to go. Dee and Bill wanted to go. Dad had a dream the night before that this is not good. He saw things that were bad, and they talked him into going anyway, and crash landed. And Mom lived 3 days, and Dad was paralyzed. He was unconscious for 3 months, and paralyzed from the waist down, and then got so he could get around real well, and moved to Mesa, Arizona, to be close to his younger brother, Uncle Earl, kind of like that was back in when they were young, and that's where he met Elmira Bigelow. Elmira Bigelow, and they got married.
How old was he when he got married? Or how old was he when he came
Well,
home?
he got married in 1959 because he got married about the same time as we did.
Yeah.
Right.
In
okay.
1959 or 58, one of those.
Mm-hmm. 58, the July,
and so,
December of 58.
Yeah, he was already married at that time.
The two of them were a married couple, newlyweds at our wedding reception in Bountiful. And we talked him into singing
Is
2
that
songs.
What he sang?
Patter the Shingle.
Oh.
At our wedding
that
reception,
song.
and we luckily Dee taped it, and we got him on tape. And also waiting for my mother-in-law. What was it called?
I'm waiting for my mother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
Getting ready for my
Getting
mother-in-law.
ready for my mother-in-law. Anyway, they're both good songs, and they're.
Well, that's the one that Hayden sang
Yeah.
Did it
at that reunion.
How old was he when he returned from the war? And when he left?
Well, he was born
age
in
range?
90. He was born in 93, and he came home in 45. 45.
Because you were 5 when he left, and you were born in 36.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I was 9 when he came home. So 45 plus 7. 45 plus 7 is 52.
He was 52.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite a bit older than the other prisoners, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he turned 50 while he was in prison camp.
Wasn't he like 30 or 40 years old before he...
Yeah, he was in his mid-40s.
When he went there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, he...
Oh, excuse me.
Anyway, he was a doctrinaire. He really knew the scriptures, knew the doctrines. That last mission that he went to, he really was a good missionary, and they treated him normal as a missionary. So he had younger companions on all the time, and so he was knocking on doors and walking.
Wow.
So anyway, he died in Carlsbad, California, wasn't it, Mom?
Mm-hmm. We were in Portland.
How old was he? And how did he die?
Kidney failure.
Was it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, when you're paralyzed like that, the kidneys get affected really bad. And
I don't remember that at all.
yeah, they and he was well, he was only married 7 years, so he was in his 60s,
So he was fairly
late
young.
60s, I think 69.
Okay.
And
Still an awful young.
That is young.
Still very young.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
anyway, that's all.